All right. Welcome everyone to our latest Title Topics webinar. These are ALTA's free presentations we offer every month on issues important to title professionals. I am Jeremy Yowie, Alta's Vice President of Communications, and today we've got a great webinar lined up to address the communications elements title and settlement agents should be considering during any crisis, quite frankly. And just elements that should really probably be baked into any disaster preparedness plan that you may already have. Before starting, I just need to touch on a few housekeeping items. You can download a copy of today's presentation from the handouts section there in the go to webinar pane. As an added benefit, we are recording today's presentation, and tomorrow you'll get an email with a link to the recording. And you can also always find all of our archived webinars at alta.org/webinars. That's alta.org/webinars. I need to thank F&F Family of Companies for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars this year. Their support allows us to provide these educational opportunities free of charge. And with that part out of the way, let me briefly introduce today's speaker. Joining us today is Dean Flura. Dean is co-founder and CEO of TitleTap. Dean is a title agent turned marketing consultant, and his company provides digital marketing strategies and service to the title and settlement services industry. He knows our business really well, having worked in it, and he spoke at many of our events over the past few years. And so with that, Dean, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Awesome. Jeremy, thanks for having me, man. It's always a pleasure to connect, and thank you for everybody for carving out a few minutes of your day. Really quickly, Jeremy, you could still hear me, see the slides. We're good?
We're good to go, even up there in New Hampshire, so fingers crossed that the water.
That's right. Yeah, full transparency. I am absolutely sitting in my gazebo out here, and I've got a house full, so bear with me if there are interruptions. I'm going to try to. I've warned everybody, but it's summertime, kids are home, and they get bored in about 5 seconds. So I'll do my best here. So with that being said, I'm going to dive into the content, and I think if everyone's familiar with GoToWebinar, there's a little chat feature. So Jeremy will be proctoring some of the questions along the way. And I'm going to try to go at pace. There's a lot of content to cover, but I've tried to really distill it down into 3 main points. My goal is that you'll have some, mainly how to use your website like a bullhorn, and some of the key messages you have in consideration, where to kind of focus and create a call, which online tools to consider adding to your website, how to possibly re-engage with your existing customer base, and then ultimately how to stay top of mind. And I completely empathize with each and every one of you as to where we are with the market. I know for most, it's a very busy time, but it's also a very uncertain time. Things in certain parts of the country tend to change just about every week. So it's really hard to forecast and kind of build in a system. And I just want to applaud everybody for the pivots that they've made. It's not easy, and it is definitely fluid and a living, breathing thing. So keep that same philosophy over to your online marketing strategy as well, and we're going to build from that. So the first point I want to drive home here is really how to leverage and use your website like a bullhorn, and some of the key messaging to consider. Without a doubt, we've kind of moved through a couple phases, and I know, depending on where you are in the country, there's sort of a step forward. In some cases, there's 2 steps back, and just depends on where you are. So it really does get confusing for customers. And so some of the obvious things that they might be thinking could be, hey, are you even open? Will my house or my home purchase still close on time? How will I sign the papers now that I can't necessarily go into your office, or maybe you have options where they can? How do they do that, and what are those options? And then, will it be safe if I get there? So again, I think for many, we've kind of come to the point of you've built in these systems and processes. You have many of them in place already. It's always good to refresh that process, especially as change happens week in and week out. So some of the notifications, again, could be how to contact your staff, what are the office hours, if you have special hours for certain types of line of service, and then some basic FAQs on how you're handling your social distancing or how you're handling signing papers, whether you have a hybrid approach, whether you have raw capabilities. These are all good things to present. I don't think you lose if you have options, right? So depending on everyone's comfort level, you want to have kind of something for everyone. It's a really tall order to do and to implement, but once you have it, it's an incredible not only marketing tool, but service to the customer. A couple of ways to do this, and again, you may already have implemented something like this, but if you haven't, just remember it's not a one and done, especially in these times. You need to have key pieces of information available and obvious, right? So whether it's a banner, so if I'm looking at, if you're looking at the screen top left, so a banner profile at the top where someone can simply, make it go away, but it's very bold. You can kind of see it. It covers a part of that header screen. If you look over to your right, having a button there. So again, with whatever your COVID response plan is another option. Maybe you create a separate tab, or you have more of a full page pop-up that is just front and center that they have to read in order for it to go away. Again, depending on your comfort level, some might consider the full page a little bit more annoying, than something like a banner profile. So it just really depends on your comfort level. But the key here is to make sure that you keep it current, right, and keep the information relevant. And if you've updated information, put the dates of those updates. Make it obvious so that they know they're looking at the most current information as it relates to your process and your plan. Some of the specific calls to action that you might want to consider, again, they drill back to what the customer might be thinking. If they have a file in progress, where should they go to get a status check on that file, right? Or what number should they call? You might have set up dedicated phone numbers for specific concerns just because of the volume that might be coming in. If someone wants to place an order, is that something that they can easily do from the site? Is there a button for that, or is there a page for that? If they need access to documents post-closing, how do they go about doing this? And again, these are all components and calls to action that can be presented on your website to help mitigate the call volume and to make the process more efficient to retrieve that information. So when we think about a focused call to action, you really need to think of, how do I put what I want the customer to focus on? Where do I want to draw the eye? How can I, put that particular piece of information up on a pedestal above everything else, above all the other white noise, right? And so there's a couple ways to do this. Obviously, bolding out fonts, adding a color element and a shape that would stand out in any kind of tab type situation on a site. And I'll show you an example of this here in a moment. But just as important is what the call to action says, right? So you want them to be concise and you want them to be clear as to what the next step would be if I choose to take action the way it's described. So placing an order, contacting you, searching for something, submitting information, a phone number, etc. You just want it all to be clear as to what my next step is. So you can kind of see here in this example, they have an order title function at the header. They have a learn more if you want to learn more about this particular company, or if you want to get in touch. The eye is drawn to the 3 red buttons there. And again, depending on what I am after as the customer or the prospect, I have a clear next step to take based on this page, right, and what it's presenting me. So be thinking of your own business process, your own business model, and ask, when I'm on my website and I'm on a specific page, what is the next step that the viewer is supposed to take here? And is it clear? Is it something that's obvious? If it's not, you might want to consider some of those call to action descriptions, and then figuring out, what color schema or what shapes make sense to really draw the eye. So to kind of wrap up sort of our first tip here, and using your website like a bullhorn and some of the key messaging, make sure that you have a current display of any kind of key notifications that you want presented. And these things, again, they change every week sometimes. So having dates do help, and think about how you would want to present that on the page. Definitely, having some kind of an obvious COVID-19 response plan If you don't have that already, not only have it, but keep it up to date. And also keep your FAQs up to date. So one of the things that you'll hear me talk about a little bit later is FAQs are really powerful from a keywords perspective, and to help keep you current with what information people are asking about. If you're getting a phone call that's the same genre of phone call every week, multiple times in that week, that's probably a good indicator that should be put on your FAQ list, because more people probably have that same question. And that's going to help you, because if they're searching for answers on a Google search as an example, and you have those popular key phrases on your site, it's going to help your site and search results for answers to that particular question and being the authority of that information. So pay attention to those calls coming in and the inquiries that you get online. Keep a log of that stuff, and if you inventory it and it comes up, again, more than a few times, it's time to add that to the list. Okay. And then we talked about inventorying a specific call to action per web page. Okay, so make sure you identify what's the next step to do when I'm on this particular page. All right. So kind of sliding into the second section here, how to re-engage your existing customer base. And this has been, out of all the conversations that I've had in varying degrees, there's a question about how do I really kind of stay relevant and keep my relationships kind of fluid and present, so that when they have an opportunity, I'm here and I'm presenting the right kind of information that they care about. So there's a couple ways to think about how we would go about doing that. One of the ways is to make sure that you are equipped with the right online tools, and that you're really marketing these capabilities, because these are going to be gateways for communication for you, whether it's communication through education or communication through virtual meetups. You want to have the tools available to execute on the actual meeting coordination, easy to find and easily accessible. So you probably recognize a handful of these logos here. We're using one of them currently for this particular session with GoToWebinar. But some of these others, for example, like a Calendly is an auto scheduler. So you sync up your calendar to it, and a customer or a prospect is able then to access whatever availability you've designated and sync that to an appointment and a scheduling tool without the back and forth. So a lot of times you can get kind of bogged down in, well, I'm available on these certain times and dates, and then that shifts for them, and before you know it, you're like 8 emails in, and it's become more work to book the appointment than the appointment itself. So you want to make that easy, and so having that blocked time, so some time blocking on your schedule dedicated to 30-minute calls or 1-hour calls is really important, especially when you're already busy. You don't want to spend your time that could be valuable doing something else, coordinating an appointment. I don't recommend it for setting up closings, but for sales calls and for virtual lunches, things of that nature, it's perfect for that. And I believe Calendly is free for like one time slot. If you want to add more time slots, there is a paid version for that, but I would check that out. It can be integrated on your site. Things like Eventbrite for events and YouTube for video. Those are some of the more common tools that you've heard. And we'll talk about a couple of others here as we move along. This is an example of the video conference and scheduler setup that we were talking about earlier. So the example to your right is a customer of ours that leverages Calendly, and they use it for, again, booking appointments, for virtual lunches and sales calls, things of that nature. So that the user is able to do that right from the website. The example to your left is a customer who's integrated Zoom. Doesn't have to be Zoom. It can be GoToMeeting, Join Me, take the conference tool of your choice, but integrate that on your site. I know with Zoom, they've integrated passwords, and so this makes it easier to access it from a customer's point of view, because if I'm on the phone and I'm talking to Mr. Smith, I can just point right to the page on my website, click on Join a Meeting, and give them the password over the phone. I found that it's become a little bit more complicated, because the way the invites come over, it's like War and Peace. I mean, there's like 3 different phone numbers and a bunch of links, and the customer can get confused as to which link they're supposed to click on or dial into. It just makes it easier if you have a reference point on your website for any kind of conference calling. Just one button where they go, and if it's password protected, you give them password over the phone. It just makes the process a lot easier to execute on. Another way to really leverage tools is to have some kind of a newsletter opt-in. It doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional newsletter. This could be ad hoc information. So, for example, let's say you did have a pretty broad update to processes and procedures for closings. You could disseminate that information through this particular list. Now, this example is leveraging Constant Contact. So both Constant Contact and MailChimp have forms that you can embed on your website, and the prospect can actually opt in for that information and automatically get put into the campaign that you set up in those systems. So again, you might have multiple campaigns and you might have multiple reasons to disseminate information. Just be clear as to what the person is signing up for. So if it's updates to processes and procedures and operations, that might be one campaign bucket. If it's upcoming workshops, events, things that they can clue into from an education perspective, that might be another campaign bucket. And so you can have multiples of these set up to receive the types of information they care about. But it's a great way to re-engage a customer list that you set up for yourself and keep the information fluent and current. Another thing that we don't see a ton of, but it is very helpful, is some kind of an events calendar. So I know on a lot of the sites that we set up, it's plugged in already. You can use an Eventbrite. With the plugins we use, they generally have the branding consistency so that it doesn't kind of break that branding. But just having a calendar on your site that highlights any kind of workshops, any kind of events you have coming up, maybe for CE, but also any community activities that you're involved with. So if you've got charitable events that you're going to be doing, for the community, put those on the calendar, and it's okay to kind of fill that up with different events for that purpose. So this is just another avenue also to market content. You can market these events. You can use this particular page in a lot of your social sharing or your email blast to take people from that particular point of contact back to your website to get more information. So if you don't have an events calendar, consider it. If you're going to just do one event, a year or two a year, probably not worth it. Just because you don't want it to have a lot of white space. But we always recommend, if you're doing 1 to 2 a quarter, consider it, because again, it's something that people do reference to see what you have up and coming. Another idea that we talk about a lot, and I'm seeing more and more now customers try this out, is hosting your own town hall. And I'd say probably the biggest pushback from this that we receive is, well, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what kind of content that people care about. And a good place to start with this is just your own sort of ecosystem. You've got probably a dozen or more subject matter experts right at your fingertips in your particular geocentric area. I would lean on asking them if they'd be open to an interview and just walking through maybe how they're keeping deals alive today, what processes that they've adapted to make deals happen, and how customers can be better prepared for whatever that is. Maybe it's a home inspection, an appraisal, things of that nature. Let that expert talk us through their process. So you're not necessarily having to come up with all the content yourself. You're laying on somebody else to do so. Another thing I suggest is just to do a quick field survey, whether you concentrate mostly on brokers or lenders. What are some of the gaps that they still have? And maybe you can find subject matter experts to fill those gaps. It doesn't always have to be kind of homegrown with you. You can lean on the expertise of others to really keep this fluid. Probably the biggest challenge, in addition to content, is consistency for these types of town halls. So again, I would leverage your calendar and try to book in advance and really get some commitments if you are going to be co-hosting these with other subject matter experts, because obviously they have availability constraints as well. But it's doable, and it's something I highly recommend when the content is right. engagement is really high, and you get to start building a reputation about bringing to the table high quality content, high value content, and it gives a reason for folks to come engage. Now, one thing I will say too, be cautious, and I think it holds true. Jeremy and I were just talking about this, but a lot of people are zoomed out. Their time is spent in front of a screen a ton. So consider that too when you're thinking about these town halls. You may or may not want them to stretch, a lengthy period of time. It might be better to do more bite-sized, condensed versions of this, and 30 minutes or less, and just get a lot of information out there. Make it powerful and relevant. But just maybe you do more of them, so people can squeeze in, 20 to 30 minutes in their day for good stuff. And so just, you'll know your market the best. Take a pulse and implement kind of what works best in your area. The last thing I'll touch on here for re-engagement is going back and actually asking for reviews where you may not have. So not in every scenario, when I've talked to customers, have they gone back and really asked for feedback. And if you're finding a lull, if you've got a pocket of time available to you, it might be worth maybe going back. Now, I'd say going back a year plus, probably not worth it. They may or may not remember the experience, but if in the last 3 to 4 months, if you haven't had an opportunity to go back and ask for feedback, it's a good time to do that. And it's also a good time in that same breath, especially if it was an awesome experience, to ask them if they have, a family or friend member that is in the process of maybe buying or selling, or considering a refinance, to think about, your particular company as a potential option, especially if they're rolling off of a really positive experience. So it's a good chance for you to kind of go back, see how they're doing, ask for that feedback, and also potentially ask for a referral. So another great way to re-engage. So again, to kind of put this in a recap, for the second set of tips, think about a video conference button and a scheduler button on your site. You can leverage that in some of the tools we talked about. Was Calendly as an example. There's a lot of those types of tools, but making it obvious and easy to get to from your website. Video conferencing, we talked about Zoom, we talked about GoToMeeting, JoinMe. There's a lot of options there, but again, having a centralized place that's easy to find on your site. Newsletter opt-in is a great way to push out a ton of information. Just make sure you categorize it in an easy way to identify, if I'm the customer, do I want that kind of information? So if it's educational, if it's more operations and processes and updates to that, just make sure that's clear so they know what they're opting in for. Tools like MailChimp and Constant Contact make it very easy to implement an opt-in on your website. We talked about an events calendar, so if you're thinking about doing a few events a quarter, that makes sense. It's also great marketing content on social and things of that nature. Fill that calendar not only with workshops and CE, but fill it with any kind of community events as well. And then we talked about hosting your own town hall, and that you don't have to necessarily come up with all the content yourself. Think about, co-hosting it with some subject matter experts in your ecosystem. That's a great way to kind of get some mileage out of those relationships and get them some exposure as well from a marketing perspective. And then lastly, we rounded out with asking for a review. So look back 3 to 4 months. If you haven't done that for the transactions, especially if there are good experiences, it's a good time for that. A lot of the closing production suites that you leverage have an export feature so that you can export out the list of closed files and who the parties were involved. And it'll make it easy for you to kind of reach out from that perspective. And then, while you're doing that, especially if it was positive, a good follow-up is maybe asking for a referral for that as well. Okay, so I'm gonna get into our last section here, which is about staying top of mind. And this, if you remember from my first tip, we talked about FAQs a little bit, and this is really going to circle back to that, because staying top of mind is going to be, in the context that we'll speak to it, driven with a lot of focus on content. So you want to make sure that your content is really local and unique. A lot of the search results that you get credit for are based on a couple things. One, did you answer the question the way that the customer was asking it? And are you making it localized based on where they are? So Google will reward based on those two criteria, and you want to make sure that you're kind of aligned with that. So it's important because, I mean, obviously we've heard this time and time again. I mean, you know, in title insurance, we basically sell the same product. What you want to focus on is the experience and really being an educator of the types of questions being asked around the experience. So again, some basic examples like what is title insurance, you know, what do I need to bring to closing, how your service is different, but maybe also having a focus on, you know, why it's important. And I know Alta does a great job at this with a lot of the Alta Hop content that's provided as well with, you know, what happens if I have an issue and, you know, I don't have the insurance, how does that get handled? What's the ramifications of that? And maybe you share certain examples of where title insurance saved the day. You know, these are all great pieces to kind of think about, but you can also be building on some of the elements with the FAQs. And the reason why that's important, again, is that, you know, prospects Google for questions. And I hear this a lot. Yes, most of them do not know who you are. They're not Googling ABC title. They're starting their process usually with a question and needing an answer for that question. So typically down the line, selling is going to be something that is an intersection between them finding the information they were originally looking for and building that trust. And I think that's especially true with services-based businesses. With products, it's different. You know, if I'm shopping for shoes, I see the right shoe, I see maybe the right price, and I can pull the you know, the buying process pretty quickly. With services, it takes a little time. You know, it's built on trust and it's built on timing, and it being the right time with the right amount of trust for me to take the next step. So by answering key questions that make it relevant to where they are, you start that trust building process. And so that's why having the right kind of content really does help. A good place to start with this and trying to understand how to package your content in a meaningful way for your particular customer base is to inventory your data. And what I mean by this is that in the last tip that we talked about, I mentioned exporting out your transactions so that you can get the names of the parties and look for maybe asking them for a review. Some of the reporting capability that you might have access to with your closing production suite also has other types of information that would be very helpful for you to sort of start to build a storyline around who it is that you're dealing with as a whole from a customer base perspective. Look at your last 20 deals. You know, what kind of story do they tell? Are you finding that you're doing more retail versus wholesale? Are you seeing more residential versus commercial? More investor-based business, or is it more first-time home buyer business? Luxury versus, you know, rental, like properties and investment properties. All those different, you know, categories need to be packaged in a certain way so that you're not only speaking to the transaction type, but you're speaking to the right demographic in terms of how they want to be spoken to and receive information. And I would pull this in. I'd pull this on a monthly basis and maybe review it with your staff weekly to make sure that the data lines up with what they're experiencing at the closing table. And so this will help, again, when you think about what's in it for me in terms of the customer. We talked about transaction type and we talked about the actual demographic. So in this example, right, you might be dealing with millennials who, by the way, they love to be part of the team and they love, you know, contributing during that process. And so, you know, that's a category that's going to want to have as much information at their fingertips and kind of help drive the process. And they also might be a for sale by owner, you know, in that category. So, you know, having the right kind of information that speaks to the transaction type, written in a way that is meaningful for them and presented in a way that's meaningful for them is important for you to know. So that's what part of your data discovery will help you start to build. And again, validate this with staff, validate this with, you know, asking customers along the way too, as to how they would like to receive this information. And here's a quick example of this where you've got, you know, a few different categories here of transaction types. So for sale by owners, foreign investor services, and witness courtesy closings. So the language being used in each of these lines of service are going to be very specific to the type, right? So this is kind of what I'd like to build on based on your particular customer mix and what transactions you tend to focus on. So think about in these categories. It's not just simply realtors, lenders, buyers, very generic. You want to be as specific as possible so that particular prospect can raise their hand and say, hey, that's me. That's where I'm at, and that's what I'm dealing with this transaction, and they can connect with that content very quickly. And the keywords count. So again, Google will go out and crawl to see if they can match the phrases that are being asked by the user to whatever content is available. And you'll see that it'll bring up in its results what the matches are in bold. Okay, so it does matter. You want to phrase a lot of your content, especially in the FAQ section, as questions. And I would also recommend that in the blog section as well. If you guys are active with a blog, it's good to have the phrases the way that a user would Google that. Okay, and you could use them interchangeably. So one of the recommendations I like to share is if you do have an FAQs page, you could use each FAQ that you have as an individual blog post. Okay, so you can again add mileage to the content that you already have and just simply repurpose it slightly so that it's got its own attention, if you will, on the blog. Another way to complement that, and you can kind of see here in this example, that's actually a video there on that first image. You could leverage a YouTube and do a short little video snippet on the FAQ, and now that becomes, a quote unquote a vlog with a V like Victor on your blog. So you have now a video component, which video is awesome. People connect with video a lot faster than they do with text. But then you can have a text component just underneath that video, and it's content that you already had in the FAQ section. So if you're looking for a quick way to start with your FAQs, okay, and then build from that in terms of getting your blog going, as well as video content. Another way to stay top of mind is to think about the different community organizations that you're a part of, and having those again posted on your website. And this is good for a couple reasons. Number one, a lot of these charity and community organizations are highly trafficked. So if you have links and you have references to them on your site, you will receive some of that SEO benefit. So be sure you have a component of that, and it also brings the human side of your business out and gives you a more holistic, kind of vantage point from the consumer's perspective as to what you're involved with the community, and that you're involved. You're an expert in what you do, but you're also caring about the ecosystem there. So as a quick bonus, I'd love for everyone to kind of Google your own business and see what comes up. I think this will help you kind of shed some light as to where you stack from a directories perspective. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about with some of these directories, I'm going to have a list here, but these directories are really, really powerful. They come in a lot of different formats. There's on the list I've got that I'll be sharing with Jeremy, and I'll show you guys here in a few. There's at least 15 on that one. But each of these you can register your business on. We highly recommend you do that. You're going to get a lot of SEO benefit, which again will help you stay top of mind, because once you've been validated as a local business, and if someone's searching for you, especially on mobile, it's going to bring up what is around that area that's registered first. Okay, even if your website's not mobile friendly, a lot of these sites are, and they're highly trafficked. And so the benefit of that is that they often rank higher than your own site. And so you can kind of see that in this example where Google My Business, Facebook, Yelp, and MapQuest all ranked higher in search than this particular customer's website. So they're very, very powerful in terms of getting you a ranking, but you have to be registered. And to do so, it's really easy. You can sign on. Most of them are free. They send you a little postcard in the mail. It's got a code on the back of it, so just make sure you don't throw that away. You'll need that to kind of finalize the registration. But what happens at that point is then you can go back, update hours and things of that nature. I will say you probably will get solicited for some kind of upsell. It's just the nature of these sites. But the actual registration component should be free. And then once you've done it, you're on here and you're registered, and you'll start seeing some of those benefits if you do search your own business. So to round out this last tip on staying top of mind, we talked about making content unique and local, and you can really start in that process by doing a deep dive of the last 20 deals that you've had, and also taking a look at your FAQs. Taking a look at your past history will help you build a platform of what kind of customers you have as a whole. You want to look at things like transaction type, but also demographics, because the way you package your content is going to speak differently according to the transaction type and the demographic that you're servicing. We talked about your FAQs also serving as blogs. So it's a great place to start, and you can even add video to that just by a short, having a short script of the actual FAQ itself, asking the question and then answering it. And then just below that, you'll have your content description. And we have a lot of customers that have started that process just from their FAQ. So I'd highly recommend that as a good next step. Register for 3 to 5 of those directory sites. So you saw there, Google My Business, Facebook, Yelp. It doesn't take long, but the benefit is tremendous for search engine, from a search engine perspective. And you're going to get not only SEO benefits, but if you do get reviews, good or bad, you're going to get them notified to you instantly, so that you can, deal with that, whether you're in a mitigation effort or you want to reach out and thank that person for leaving a positive review. So all in all, great SEO benefits with content and these directory sites to help keep you top of mind from that perspective. Whew, Jeremy, I feel like I've run a marathon here. So to recap, we talked about leveraging your website like a bullhorn and some of the key messaging that should be included with that. We also touched on how to re-engage with your existing customer base, as well as how to stay top of mind. I've got, and I'll show everyone here, a breakdown, a matrix, if you will, of some of the tools we talked about in this process. And so, Jeremy, I don't know if now's a good time to kind of get into some of the questions. We do have a special as a part of this presentation, that if you need help in any of the areas that we talked about, reach out to me at dean@titletap.com. Alta Special. I'll come back to this in a second, but here's a couple of the list of references and tools that we'll be sharing as part of this presentation. So this is an online engagement tool summary. What tools, why you use them in an engagement idea. And then I've also got a list of the directory sites here as well that we'll be sharing. But Jeremy, I don't know if you want to field any questions at this point, if we have any.
Yeah, no. Thanks, Dean, for the great insight on why you need a communication strategy and the awesome tips on actually how to implement it. It can become a little overwhelming, I think, with all the different solutions that are out there. How do you, distill through it and pick ones that are actually going to be effective for your operation. As we mentioned, we will have some time. We do have some time for Q&A, so submit your questions in the questions box, and we'll get them answered by Dean. And if you don't have a question now, I think it's something later. His email is there, so please.
Yeah, I'll keep this up.
Yeah, we do have some questions. I just have some comments as well. That the calendar, the events, tying your involvement to the community, it just goes an extra step. Also doing we're doing a tell our story campaign right now, and it's really we're trying to put a face to the industry. We're just not a title insurance product. There are people working in this industry in every county of this country, helping people, buy homes, and not just from the work perspective. You're doing awesome things, charitable work in your local community. So tell people about it. We're doing the hashtag good deeds. We've been compiling stories and sharing that, and it's really inspirational seeing everything that you all are doing in the community. So use that synergy for your benefit. And the newsletter that Dean talked about, another good way to communicate with your customers any new services that you may be offering out. Digital closings with social distancing. You may have implemented RON or some variation of digital closing. It's sibling RIN, but letting your customers know the various ways you can get their deals closed is going to be helpful to them and a great marketing tool for you. So we do have
just to add to that point. Yeah, just add to that point, Jeremy. Another thing that we've seen trending is like online deposits. So, that's another newer process for a lot of agents that are starting to go that direction. And again, that could be an example of where you would send a blast out. It's an update to your process and procedures that you have that capability now.
So the majority of Alta members are small business, and then from there, are small. They have less than 10 employees, so a lot of times the president or CEO probably going to be the one in charge maybe of the website. So any advice on how much time should you devoted to the website? You mentioned updating the content. Should they schedule an hour maybe on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon to kind of go through that process of just looking what kind of content's on their site?
Yeah. So what I tend to recommend for a lot of business owners, especially that are tight on time, is if you're going to have, for example, if you do have a marketing style meeting or an operations style meeting, if it's important enough for you to communicate in the field or at the office, whatever the new thing is, right? Whether it's an expansion, a process change, if it's deemed important enough to communicate that outbound, within the office and to customers that are there, it should be mirrored on your website. So what I would do is whatever notes that are being taken as to the next steps coming out of those meetings that are meaningful to the public to know there, should also probably be mirrored on your site. So it could be that that's weekly, if those meetings are happening weekly. Sometimes, it's ad hoc, and it's due to something that came up, so just remember to keep your online presence current, because very quickly the information can go stale. And I think now more and more customers are leaning on technology as a main channel for getting the information that they need. I mean, we're in very uncertain times, and as much certainty and your information that they can gather, especially during any kind of move, a buy or sell, which is highly emotional anyway, is only going to help them in that process know kind of a grounded next step.
Yeah, and you mentioned information. Again, anyone on the call, Dean did mention the homeowner outreach program. Lots of good content that Alta members have access to, their visuals, their blog posts, and again, Dean, great advice on just taking your facts, breaking them up, individual posts, video, and then use that on social media. One simple FAQ can you could have 4 or 5 different mechanisms of reaching people. Ethan submitted a question, and his question is about the people you're trying to reach. Any recommendation on who you should target? He's asking, is it better to attract realtors, lenders, or the public? At ALTA, we've tried to juggle that and decide who do you go after. It's expensive to try and market to all consumers. Obviously, lenders and realtors can have some influence on who a homeowner may select. But at the end of the day, do you have any advice on who a title company may want to target? Obviously, they probably want to look at their core business and see who they're serving.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is kind of an individual or business centric answer based on your model. So the way I would answer that is exactly kind of to parlay what you're saying, Jeremy, and take a look at where you are today. What kind of business do you get today? How are you getting the business, right? What's coming to you organically without a targeted effort, and why? You might get a story there, you might not, but that's a good place to kind of get a baseline. And do you have any core value proposition that might be interesting to one party more so than the next? Again, double downing on your strengths and sort of niching doesn't mean you exclude all business. It just means that if you're going to be known for something and you're trying to drive it home, what makes it so special to that person that they're going to want to do business with you? How do you speak to their book of business? So I think understanding what tools or what core competencies that you have at your disposal that you're strong at, and building a case from there what's coming natural, I guess, is how I would start that, and seeing if you can build a story there, because there is no right or wrong answer. If you build it based on, what makes the most sense for your business, and that changes depending on where you are in the country.
Good advice. A couple of questions about websites. You mentioned this in your presentation. Could you maybe review or just highlight maybe the top 2 or 3 things that are just essential that need to be on a title company's homepage?
Yeah. So the way I'll answer that question is, what's the desire? In other words, what do you want the homepage to accomplish for you as a business, right? That's number one. That might be different for everybody. We've had some folks that want to purely focus on a very simple, straightforward. Hey, most of my customers know me. I've got a closed marketplace here. It might be because of a JV scenario. I just need them to know where to go to submit an order. That's different than somebody who's focused on getting brand awareness in a new market from a retail perspective, who needs to market to everybody. So, it really depends on what's the next step that you want the person to accomplish from getting onto your home page. A couple of things that I would just recommend considering is, obviously, make it easy for people to contact you from your homepage. So having a phone number that's easily accessible, a place for them to reach out to you via email, is also a suggestion. I would also entertain something that's going to draw them into whatever brand recognition you're trying to accomplish. If you want to be a localized expert based on where you are, so if you're based, for example, let's say in Tampa, Florida, and you want to be known as a Tampa expert, you should probably have some imagery that is related to Tampa that, I don't even need to know who you are, but I recognize the skyline, right? So you must be based where I'm based. If you've got more of a national presence, it might be more of a transactional type imagery that you want to consider, to show kind of the breadth and depth of your capabilities across the country. So it just really depends on what the goal of the business is. And I think once you define that, you can sort of reverse engineer into what is the homepage looking to accomplish. In general, your site needs to be secure. It needs to be mobile friendly. It needs to have crisp, high quality, high definition imagery. So whether that's photos, whether that's a video homepage, it needs to be crisp and high quality. And you want your content to mean something. And remember, it's not all about your accolades and certifications and everything else. It's really about the customer. What is it that you can do for them, and make sure that's articulated in a way that's going to be meaningful for that type, that transaction type, and that demographic type.
Yeah, kind of tied to the previous question. It kind of just depends on who are you trying to serve. So really understand the business model. And also has a consumer education website, Home Closing 101, and I track the analytics on it. And every year, the top 2 viewed pages on that is the page closing cost explained and closing process explained. So consumers are wanting to go there to one, understand what they're paying for, and to know what to expect. So probably want to replicate a little bit of that, just have some transparency to the consumer, and in a way the realtor and the lender, because if they're talking to the consumer kind of for you, you want to provide that easy to understand information that they can then relay to the consumer.
And Jeremy, I would ask, I mean, and if many of you have the capability of connecting Google Analytics, you can kind of see what your most popular pages are to start. But you also, if you're dealing with a site that's not optimized, and you may need to start from scratch, ask customers, hey, do you go to my site? What do you use it for? What's most helpful? If you have tools, if you have, some of the things you're talking about, which are more educational, those win a lot. And again, easy places for people to make contact with you, with having an interactive map, and ways for them to get that information. they use this as reference tools and resources. So as much of that information as you can have on there, but that might be slightly different, again, depending on where you are. So I would first canvas, take a quick inventory of what would be most meaningful and helpful at their fingertips, and just make sure you've got that.
Okay. All right, you do have a few more questions. Just a reminder, submit them in the questions box. Another question around the website, and I don't know if maybe you could share any anecdotes or what you've seen and your clients doing. Any title companies, implementing chat boxes or the use of artificial intelligence to answer the simple questions that may be in their FAQ document or anything like that?
Yeah, so we are seeing a trend there, and it's funny. We had gotten a lot of requests to add live chat from a lot of customers, and the truth of that process is that many of them found it was kind of a painful experience, just because they were so busy they couldn't get to every chat quick enough. I mean, if you think about it, if you or I, and probably a lot of folks in the audience, if you're on a chat, if you don't get a response like within like 4 or 5 seconds, it starts to get kind of annoying. And so that was what was happening. That was what was happening. So they quickly said, hey, can you guys have any kind of a chat? We actually have a chat bot. So it is a AI. It shifted from, it's like AI, shifted from live. And so it's interactive FAQ, but it comes off very humanistic, and it answers a lot of the questions that are particular to the business. We do find that that's very helpful for a lot of customers for both lead generation and for business continuity. It doesn't require a human, and it gets that quick instant gratification for the customer to help them to the next step. There are other tools that are, I would say, deeper rooted AI tools that actually can speak to your closing suite. And so, if it's transaction oriented that you want, the information to be revealed, if they're asking, for example, about a status of a file or whatnot, a lot of the bots out there are going to be limited, to that, because they don't interact with those suites. But there are some tools out there that do, and so that can also be helpful. Again, what you're trying to accomplish with a chatbot is instant gratification. People tend to not want to surf the entire website for quick information, and so more and more we're seeing use of those types of tools to help automate that process. Greater efficiency, high value return for the customer, and in many cases it does help with some lead flow as well.
Yeah, and then hopefully maybe save a little time from the person answering phone calls and can do other
Absolutely
things.
Yeah, absolutely do.
Question, I've got one more that came in, and Thomas asked about maybe any of your customers and how you're seeing them accept online deposits. Is it through their websites, or are they doing it through their banks?
Yeah, so there's a couple different tools out there, and we've partnered with a couple of them. And one of them is web-based, and another one is actually a mobile app. And so it just depends on what your comfort level is. But they are accessing. The way we do it is we have them integrated into the site, and they are accessing it from the website, and then that's redirecting them to the secure portal, whether it's the web-based product or the mobile app product, and then it's taking them, at that point, and those tools will talk to your bank. They have a validation process that they go through, and then they're set up to do that. And so, but that's worked out very well for a lot of customers.
Okay. All right. Well, no more questions in the queue. So again, if you think of anything later, Dean's email is there. Please feel free to reach out to him with any other follow-up or questions.
Yeah. It was fun, Jeremy. I appreciate you having me, and I hope for everyone out there this was productive, good use of your time. And any other questions you have, to Jeremy's point, please reach out to me. I'm happy to mind share with you, and hopefully help you out in some way.
Okay. Again, just a reminder, if you missed any of today's webinar, you think others in your office would benefit from listening, recording the presentation will be available at alta.org/webinars. And again, you also get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. You can also check out any of the upcoming webinars we have at alta.org/webinars. Next week, we have one on easy ways to advocate for your business and industry. And then on August 12th, we have a webinar on cybersecurity trends. And this webinar will actually offer CE, CLE. And with that, that will bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. To wrap up, I need to thank FNF family of companies once again for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars. Dean, thank you for joining us.
Hey, man. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care, everyone.